Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
We've made our way back to Washington, flying essentially overnight from Chicago to bring you the latest here on Balance of Power, live from the nation's capital. Now that the DNC has wrapped, a lot to talk about. We're going to be joined live from Chicago by Annmarie Hordern, who is still with us, and an important conversation ahead with a lawmaker from Chicago. Robin Kelly, the Congresswoman from Illinois, will be here as well, as we try to distill everything that we heard over the last 4 nights in Chicago. An historic turn in a presidential campaign that came to fruition Monday night with the actual president, Joe Biden, speaking to delegates, running through Thursday when Kamala Harris made history as the first woman of color to accept a major political party's nomination. Let's walk you through the week.
It's been the honor of my lifetime to serve as your president. I love the job, but I love my country more.
We refused to give up on America. Millions marched, many ran for office. We kept our eyes on the future. Well, my friends, the future is here.
Here's a 78-year-old billionaire who has not stopped whining about his problems since he rode down his golden escalator 9 years ago.
I want to know, who's going to tell him that the job he's currently seeking might just be one of those black jobs?
More than anything else, let us choose freedom. Why? Because that's the best of America. We're all Americans, and together, let's all choose Kamala Harris.
It's the fourth quarter. We're down a field goal, but we're on offense and we've got the ball. We're driving down the field. And boy, do we have the right team.
I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
There you have it, as we brought you the sights and sounds from Chicago this week in a way that only Bloomberg can. And a special thanks to Bloomberg's broadcast technicians and the world-class team led by Steve Fosberg that helped us bring that story to you from Chicago here on Bloomberg TV and radio, on YouTube, and all the platforms that you count on, including our podcast. As I mentioned, we're going to bring you back to Chicago in a moment to talk with Bloomberg's Annmarie Hordern. But first, we want to bring in our panel for their thoughts coming off of last night and looking ahead now. We're trying to turn the page today on Bloomberg to get a sense of what the coming weeks are going to look like here. Not just the debate, but the fight for money, the deployment of resources, and the final sprint to November. Lisa Camooso Miller is with us, former RNC Communications Director, host of the Friday Reporter podcast, Republican strategist alongside Democratic strategist Brad Howard, Corcoran Street Group, where he is founder. Great to see both of you here. Brad, I'll start with you. Coming off of a big night here in Chicago, a lot of folks seem to think Kamala Harris closed the deal in her connecting with delegates in the room. She did make it in prime time, which was the first time we saw that happen for the headliner all week. But how did she connect with Americans who were undecided, watching at home in their living rooms?
Look, I was in the arena last night, and man, that was quite some energy. You know, and I think the lead up to her speech was, very much a targeted message to those kind of disenfranchised globalist Republicans, to those undecided voters who may have some concerns about her and her leadership, to see a litany of people who wore the uniform pointing to her and saying she can be our commander in chief. We trust her with the nuclear launch codes and to lead us in a very complicated foreign policy world right now. I thought that was extremely powerful. And I think you're going to see, you saw Adam Kinzinger, who was a Republican. I was chief of staff to Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy. He was on the January 6th commission with her. He's a noble leader. He's a patriot. He's a veteran who served this country honorably. To have him get up there and put his arm around Kamala Harris and Tim Walz and say, this is a party that is inclusive and stands for America and is a patriotic party and is not everything you hear from Donald Trump. I thought that was a very powerful moment as well.
Mm-hmm. All right, Lisa, as the Republican, give us your view here. Looking down the chute to November, what is the job for Donald Trump?
Well, Joe, I mean, the one thing I think that we discussed a little bit earlier in the previous hour was that this also, too, is a word of caution, that the Republicans actually came out of their convention feeling very positive and very motivated and very excited about the messages that were coming out of there. And then, of course, there's the reality, right? There's the getting on the road. There's the meeting the election, all of the election obstacles that they have to lead and meet. And this is going to be difficult. It's one of those things where they're riding high off the DNC, the Democrats, and it was an incredibly powerful convention. So please don't let that be lost on my words. But what I'm saying now is that we have a lot of obstacles to get through and to get to before we get to Election Day. And so they will have to be very disciplined. What Donald Trump has to do is he's going to do whatever he wants, Joe. So we're going to just follow and watch along. But more than anything, he's going to have to now pick apart very carefully all of those themes and those messages that were shared from the DNC that really resonated with those voters that were undecided before Monday of this week, and try to win them back, because I really think that the tone and the tenor that came out of the DNC was positive and hopeful and forward-looking, and that's quite the opposite of what we heard from the RNC.
Clutch take from our panel. Lisa and Brad will stay with us for the balance of the hour here. Let's go to Chicago right now and gauge the political hangover with Bloomberg's Annmarie Hordern, who is still on the ground. That was a late night, Annmarie. You were on the floor. I don't know how you even managed to get through that sea of humanity with some of the interviews you brought us with the likes of Chuck Schumer and Chris Coons. What is the lasting impacts of this DNC?
Well, a tremendous amount of energy has been reinfused into this Democratic Party, and that was really on display, especially after her speech. I was standing near Chuck Schumer, near the New York delegation, and he was dancing in the aisle, and he was saying it was pitch perfect. To Lisa's point, there was a lot of joy and a message of hopefulness coming out of this DNC. Heavy on rhetoric, heavy on vibes, light Joe on details. And that's going to be the questions facing this campaign in the next 70 to 75 days. And even earlier, if you're a voter in Pennsylvania, maybe you're going to go do a mail-in ballot just a week after the debate on September 10th. And this is what the former president is trying to really put Kamala Harris in a corner about. What are actually her policies when it comes to things like the economy, energy, immigration? Because we have seen her in the past flip-flop, most notably things like Medicare, things like fracking. But what they're trying to do, Tobin Marcus of Wolf Research put it this way this morning, and I've been talking about it all morning because I think he really nailed it. Strategic ambiguity when it comes to policies. They want to come out and talk about potentially some of these populist ideas that land with swing state voters, but stay away from the details. How long does that last? That's a key question.
Well, absolutely right. Rick Davis was making a very similar point, having run a campaign and a convention, a couple of campaigns. Annmarie, why would you put all the details on the paper here and jeopardize a lead in the polls and the momentum, the spirit that you refer to in the room? But she's going to have to get more specific by September 10th, isn't she?
Well, I think if you're still an independent, you're unsure who you're voting for, she probably would need to get more specific. The American people seem to be hungry when you ask pollsters for more details on policies. And when you look at the polling, yes, she's been able to narrow that gap, bringing in some disaffected Biden voters who were really concerned about his age. But when you look under the hood of polling, the top two issues that American people care about the most, by far, is the economy and immigration. And when you ask them, who do you think has better policies? A lot of the time they'll say the former president, which is why the Trump campaign really wants him to stay on message, which he's struggled to do. But potentially, Joe, he is going to get an endorsement today. And also that's something else we need to look at. How is that going to change the camp? He is going to be in Glendale, just a few miles away. You have RFK going to be in Phoenix. This is in Maricopa County. This was one of the key fights of 2020. Can that endorsement potentially shift Maricopa County, another swing district like in Pennsylvania, to the Trump column? These are key questions. And I think, we are closer to the debate, so potentially more policy. You talk to people, and one of the key things I took out of this campaign, underneath all the excitement, was the fact whether it's Michelle Obama, Barack Obama, go vote. You cannot just take this energy and leave. You have to go, and we have to mobilize. their
Let's
words.
see how that plays out in 75 days. Yeah, we were there listening, Annmarie. It's great to see you get home safe from Chicago. She's the last one left on the field with us here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
I'm going to keep it in Chicago for a moment and bring in Congresswoman Robin Kelly as we add the voice of a Democrat with a district that touches the city that just hosted the Democratic National Convention. With us from our Chicago bureau. Congresswoman, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. You were in the hall last night. We've heard a lot about electric energy, but how did she connect with people who sit at home watching this show, wondering what they're going to do in November?
Well, I heard from a lot of people sitting at home that didn't have the opportunity to be in the stadium or the arena, and they were very, very excited. And I had enough people asking me for tickets to get in, but I think people are very, very excited. They're ready to go to work. As you guys were saying, it just can't end here. We have to go back to our corners of the United States and register people to vote, inform voters, and make sure they get to the poll. Excuse my voice, too much screaming.
Yeah. That's going around. Congresswoman, a lot of people are peeking out of one eye and have no voice today, but that's the whole point of this. We had some pretty similar looks and sounds coming out of Milwaukee as well. Give us a bit of a clinic on this. The way resources are deployed, the way money is raised and spent, the way volunteers are collected, and the geography, the decisions that are going to go into the geography and the map over the next couple of weeks are going to be key to who wins this campaign. How will that unfold in the couple of weeks ahead?
Well, we're definitely, of course, going to look at the swing states. We don't expect people to come to Illinois, but Illinois is mobilizing to go to Wisconsin and Michigan. And from my district, the 2nd district, I've already recruited a number of people to go to Wisconsin and campaign and go to Michigan. And that's what we're doing all around the country. Those states that we look at as more blue are helping the states and deploying to the states that are more red or more purple. And that's how the resources will be divvied up. But like, I'm even going to Florida in the next week, and I know some of my colleagues right from the convention, they went to Michigan.
Mm-hmm. Well, Michigan makes sense to me. Florida is interesting. We're hearing more and more about what the Sunshine State might mean in this campaign. And God, I'm old enough to remember when that was the state you had to win. That was the swing state. And you wonder if some of these red states are turning purple in the ways that the Cook Political Report and Sabato's Crystal Ball are suggesting. Congresswoman, you're on the Committee on Energy and Commerce. And there's a big debate right now about how to keep the economy moving again and how to bring prices lower. Donald Trump says the answer is drill, baby, drill, knowing, of course, that we're already producing a record amount of gas and oil in this country. Would that work to bring prices down? Drill, baby, drill, starting his first day in office. What would that mean for our economy?
Well, like you said, we're already drilling, so I don't know how much that would work, but we do have to work on lowering costs, because even though we know things are better, there's a lot of positive, but still some people are not feeling it. So we have to keep continuing to look at the kitchen table, the grocery stores, what the gas prices are, even though those have come down some too, interest rates and things like that, because that's what touches people every single day. We can say what we want, but people go grocery shopping every week. But there's, just like housing, we have to look at, but like legislation that we've passed under the Biden-Harris administration will help bring people into the middle class. There's been a lot of jobs created, good paying jobs, and we have to keep doing more of that.
Well, of course, through the position on your committee, you're focused on this LNG export ban, which is something that's gotten a lot of talk here this year. Would Kamala Harris maintain that export ban while this review is taking place?
I'm sure, I don't want to speak for her, I shouldn't say I'm sure, but she probably would wait until she got all the facts before she made a decision. She seems like, she's a strategic woman, and she's going to look at everything before she jumps to make a decision.
You know, we're hearing from a terminal subscriber right now, Congresswoman, who seems to think there's an asymmetry in media coverage here. Kamala Harris is expected to provide a detailed policy white paper here, and Donald Trump says drill, baby, drill, and that's considered a proposal. Do you agree?
I do agree. He has a lot of little slogans that he puts forth, and people accept that. When he says the crazy things he says, people just say, oh, that's Donald Trump. And it just seems like we're held to a higher standard. I have always felt like that. And he could get away with things because he's Donald Trump that other people cannot get away with, cannot say, they have to prove themselves more. And I feel that's very unfair. And I'm sure because of her being a female, a woman of color, that's even more pronounced.
Well, in our remaining moment, Congresswoman, I'd love for you to speak to that, because Donald Trump continues to question Kamala Harris's racial identity, and after a night in which she spent quite a bit of time reintroducing herself, talking about her biography, I wonder if you think this is going to be a course through this campaign, if this is going to be a talking point through this campaign.
It may be a talking point for him, but yes, there's a lot of first, but she's qualified. When they call her DEI, we say definitely earned it. She's had a brilliant career. She's been a good vice president, and he's the last person that she should have to prove herself to. But she's making her case, and we're going to help her make her case.
Well, I don't think she'll have too much trouble with the state of Illinois. And
no, but we're going all over.
I understand you've got some travel ahead. We'd like to keep in touch with you to hear how that's going, because this is far from over. But I do want to thank you for hosting us in Chicago for the week. I know that all of the folks representing that great city and the state of Illinois were very pleased with the way things went, and it was a great time for everyone to be there, Congresswoman. We had Milwaukee, now we have Chicago, the middle of the country that will decide this presidential election. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. Yeah, we're back in the Amtrak corridor where we normally join you from here. Kailey Leinz is in the field, and we've got a lot more ahead. We'll assemble our panel. As I mentioned earlier, Lisa Camooso Miller and Brad Howard are with us, distilling what we heard this week and moving forward to the campaign and the election in November. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. We've made our way back to the Capitol from Chicago, where it all came to a crescendo last evening. 4 days, just like Republicans had in Milwaukee, and in this case, Vice President Kamala Harris accepting her party's nomination, introducing herself to some, reintroducing herself to others, and speaking at least in broad terms about policy, including the economy. Let's listen.
And as president, I will bring together labor and workers and small business owners and entrepreneurs and American companies to create jobs, to grow our economy, and to lower the cost of everyday needs like health care and housing and groceries.
There you have it as we assemble our panel the day after. Brad Howard is back with us, founder of Corcoran Street Group, Democratic strategist, and Lisa Camooso Miller, Republican strategist, former spokesperson for the RNC, communications director, and, of course, host of the Friday Reporter podcast. Great to have you both here. Coming off of this speech, Brad, I'm compelled, having heard from a number of our listeners and viewers over the past couple of days, that there's a double standard in the media, asking for interviews and details on policy from Kamala Harris, where Donald Trump can say, drill, baby, drill, or I'll be a dictator for a day. And nobody seems to want to look under the hood to figure out how things might work, how they would be paid for. Is that true?
Well, I mean, absolutely. I mean, you go back to when Donald Trump first emerged onto the scene, he talked about very little policy, and the policy he did talk about, there was no way to implement, as he'd come to find out, everything from a Muslim ban to building the wall, which he never did. So, I think when they did roll out policy with Project 2025, and the American people had such a strong backlash that they dissembled the team and pretended it never existed. So, yeah, I think it's what Republicans realize is when they talk about policy, voters reject it on everything from abortion to, a Muslim ban to building a wall. I think when Democrats talk about policy, We do it in an inclusive way. And I think our policy is always better. Democratic problems have always been, how do we communicate our policy to voters? And it's usually because we don't lead with values. Like we're afraid to lead with patriotism, freedom, and values. And that's what Kamala's campaign is doing so beautifully. And last night's convention was so beautifully. When you talk about values, you get on the front porch so you can get in the house and talk about kitchen table issues. And so this idea from the Republican side that we've got to rush to talk about policy, Democrats aren't taking the bait, right? We are talking values. We are bringing people into the big tent party, letting them know that there's a home here, that whether you are an avid pro-Palestinian protester or whether you're a pro-Jewish voter, we can have a sensible debate within the party, hear each other out, and understand that Donald Trump is just bad for everyone involved.
Is that rational? Is that sensible to you, Lisa? Or would you get your candidate out to just take this issue off the table, put her out for an interview next week, add some details to the policy proposal, and get back on the road?
I mean, Joe, I think you're absolutely right on about this. We don't hold the same standard to a Donald Trump that we do for any other candidate. And so that's the kind of thing that we have to sort of keep in mind. The media, the people behind the candidate, behind the vice president, really, and keep that in mind, right? So that's going to be, regardless of how the rules are working, she's going to be asked about those kinds of things in her policies and how she feels about that. So any way she can communicate that in a way that continues to be successful, I think is the right way to go. But the rules are different. Donald Trump is going to Donald Trump. I said that in the earlier in the hour. It's the same kind of thing. Yes, and whether or not it's fair or not, you're hearing the same from the Republicans. They're saying that the media is covering the vice president differently. And this is the perennial fight that always happens. I think that the Democrats need to continue to do what they're doing, rolling out their policies, talking about the issues in the way that they are in hopeful and future forward ways. And that's going to continue to be the winning way to go. Regardless of whether or not they put the vice president out there, they need to do everything they can right now to put risk under reward, whatever they can do to continue to be in the positive forward momentum. That is the way that they're going to be successful on Election Day. And if Republicans aren't careful, they're going to overplay their hand. Donald Trump absolutely will overplay his hand. It's part of his brand and how he behaves. And that's the kind of thing that really is going to be the deciding factor when it comes to Election Day in this very, very narrow fight.
I don't know if you guys have your eyes on RFK Jr. any longer, but there is news today that he may be about to drop out of the race. In fact, this could happen about a half an hour from now. Last night, RFK Jr. withdrew from the ballot in Arizona. Now, reports were already out there saying that he might cut a deal to endorse Donald Trump, maybe get a job in the Trump administration in return. But Donald Trump also has a campaign stop today in Arizona where they are promoting a, quote, special guest. You know, the question everyone asks here, Brad, is where those votes go. There may not be a lot of them, but what would happen if RFK left this race? What would be the impact?
Well, let's be clear. A lot of the consolidation behind Kamala Harris's numbers were the folks that were disenfranchised with Joe Biden, either because of his age or issue on, Israel. The minute that Kamala became the nominee, you saw RFK Jr.'s numbers plummet, and they all went to Kamala. There wasn't a rush of Trump supporters to Kamala. We haven't seen that in the polling yet, though I think that's a possibility. What we did see was all the third-party minded, kind of what we call a double hater, procrastinator group that didn't like either. They all went to Kamala. And so that's why you saw a big rise in her numbers. The RFK Jr. folks that are left are probably a little more further to the right than Donald Trump is, or certainly more libertarian than Donald Trump is, I think, and a little more conspiracy driven. And so I think they're going to go home to Donald Trump. So I think Joe Biden getting out surged Kamala's numbers, in a little bit of a sugar high first, and then she carried it on and has really brought in a whole new set of young voters into the equation that were never even involved. But I do think this is a net benefit for Donald Trump, particularly in a state like Arizona. But I got to tell you, with the Arizona, I think we just saw this week too, that the ballot question will be on the ballot in Arizona about abortion protections. That's going to be a huge problem for Kari Lake and Donald Trump in Arizona, and a huge benefit to Ruben Gallego, the congressman there, who's a friend of mine running for the Senate. That abortion question is going to keep the abortion question front and center for voters in Arizona. We all remember, 6 months ago, that disastrous Supreme Court decision that took the abortion restrictions back to pre-Civil War era time. And so that abortion question being front and center, I think, is overall going to wash any kind of net benefit Donald Trump would get out of this endorsement from RFK Jr. So I do think overall there will be a net benefit.
Really interesting. Ruben Gallego, of course, speaking in prime time at the convention last evening as part of the veterans part of the show. Lisa, Brad's right. RFK Jr.'s vote share has come down a lot since Joe Biden left the race. He's kind of in mid-single digits right now. That, of course, could make a difference in a swing state with this race being so tight. How do you see this departure impacting things, if it happens?
I'm glad Brad brought it around to the young voter, because really the one thing that I'm hearing from really first-time voters and those really young voters, Joe, is that they were looking at somebody like RFK Jr. because outside of the fact that Donald Trump and Joe Biden were really sort of beyond sort of the reach for those youth voters, RFK was appealing to those voters because he was on TikTok and he was on these platforms where they're getting their news. And all of a sudden, with the change of the candidates, with Kamala Harris and this young, vibrant campaign that really is appealing to people that are in a different generation, that's really where those voters came in. And so if you're looking at the TikTok voter, right? I mean, I use that roughly. It's just basically the folks that are getting their information from different platforms than traditional ones. If they're going with either an RFK or a Kamala, I suspect that that's precisely the calculation that's going on at the Republican in the RNC and in the campaign, is that this is a way to appeal to that side of the voter and that segment of the vote. But also, too, I'm not so sure that that's really going to be quite as successful because there are so many parts of the RFK campaign that are just so far out there that really it would be surprising to me if those young voters would say, I'll choose a Trump over a Kamala.
Yeah. Well, I have to admit, I'd love to know what job RFK Jr. would hold in a Trump administration. If it's FDA, maybe the vaccines are. I'm not too sure.
Yeah, that's the one that they're saying.
That was what Ron DeSantis floated at one point as well. Yeah, it wouldn't be a big surprise, I guess, if you want to go to Washington and break it, as they say. But Brad, does Kamala Harris do anything here with some Kennedys? Get up there with Joe Kennedy, the former congressman, wrap herself with the family if this happens, to remind people that this is not necessarily the Kennedy brand. Remind Democrats it's not the Kennedy brand they remember.
Well, we've done it with yeah.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, Brad. That was for you.
Okay, so they did that when the group of voters that was going to RFK Jr. were like Democrats or longtime Democrats or young voters who are concerned about Biden's age. They were flirting with RFK Jr. So the family got up and said, no, this is not the Kennedy of the past. This is not the Kennedy that we all envision and love. And this is the opposite of that. I think they had to do that then. Now they don't have to do that. Like all the people that they're concerned about that would win over are already over at Kamala's camp. I think at this point forward, they just ignore RFK Jr. completely, as I think most people will. Donald Trump has a tendency to say, thanks for the endorsement, now get out of my way. And so I think you're going to see RFK Jr. shoved aside here. I'd be shocked if they use him in any meaningful way. You know, there's also some rumors that, Donald Trump is very unhappy with his vice presidential pick. So who knows what's going to go on there. But I heard HHS secretary for RFK Jr., which I just is mind-blowing to me. The people that they put into these positions of authority who, can you create a conspiracy theory while you're the leader of the agency? I don't know how that works. So it'll be fascinating to watch. But I think it's a reminder that these are unserious people and we have serious problems. And I think Kamala, you look at I think the biggest thing I took away from the convention this week is look at the Democratic talent, the Democratic bench. I mean, my gosh, we had everything from Gavin Newsom, Gretchen Whitmer, Josh Shapiro, Mark Kelly, Wes Moore of Maryland, who I think is a rising star in the party. I mean, just down the line, just this incredible bench of young governors and senators and House members and veterans. Ruben Gallego was a rising star as well. I think he's particularly potent because he not only is Hispanic, he speaks Spanish. He literally grew up, I think, homeless at one point. And went to Harvard and is, forced his way. And you read his book, it's incredible, where he talks about all of his friends around him. His entire unit died, except for like him and a buddy. I mean, just an incredible story. You got people like that all across the country. Yeah. And that's going to be fun to watch. So RFK Jr., I think he's going to be dismissed next week and we won't hear from him again.
Let him be, says Brad Howard. Great panel. Brad, get home safe from Chicago. You were great with us this week in Chicago. We really appreciate the insights and all of the experience that you brought to us here. Brad Howard at Corcoran Street, Lisa Camooso Miller, Friday Reporter Podcast. Great to have you both here this day after the DNC. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power Podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.